Hi all, hope you're staying safe and well. This is the first video that I'm going to do looking at Romeo and Juliet. So this is particularly for first reading through the play, getting to know the themes, getting to know the characters, getting to know the contexts. This first video is just going to be looking at the context of the play, looking at when Shakespeare was writing, the time he was writing, and some of the core ideas at the start of the play. So for your task to do throughout this video is just to be making notes, jotting down ideas, and starting to think about predictions about how these might come to play a part in the significance of the narrative of the story. The next video we're going to look at is one character, and then we're going to start looking at the narrative of the play. So you're going to need some paper just to be able to make some notes and just start to think about how these ideas might be presented and how it might be significant to the setting of the Shakespeare play. Okay, when reading a play, or more likely when we are watching a play in performance, one of the main things we have to take into account is when this play was written and the influences and the ideas and the themes that are present within the play and how Shakespeare would be influenced by that in his own writing. So this video is all about the context and the background that's going on around Shakespearean times to influence the dialogue, the staging, the setting of Romeo and Juliet. So the play was written in the late 1500s, so we don't have an exact date, but we believe it's between 1595 and 1597, so just at the turn of that century. Queen Elizabeth I is on the throne, the last of the Tudor monarchs. So this is the sort of time period we're talking about, and we're going to be considering the influences in Shakespearean society and how that would be relevant to our understanding of the play. Okay, the first of these influences that I'd like to take into account is the idea of different types and different forms of love. So when we say the play Romeo and Juliet, to most people, they will be well aware that it is a play about love. But what we could also consider is the different forms of love that are presented within that. So Romeo and Juliet's relationship is a passionate and romantic form of love. However, there are other forms of love within there. There is parental love. We have both sets of parents and their love for their child. Now, in Shakespeare's time, children were expected to follow the roles and responsibilities of their parents. Now, in particular, Juliet, as a young woman, would be seen to be subservient to her father because his preparations for her relationship and her future was seen as the most important point of view. The father has control over the child. Similarly with Romeo, he would be expected to follow in his father's footsteps. He would be expected to follow that. We have elements of religious love within the play as well. We have characters evoking God and asking for religious support. One of the most important characters in the play is Friar Lawrence, who Romeo goes to for advice. So we have religious love as well as not just the romantic love. So as we're reading through the play and as we're looking at the different scenes, start to think about how Shakespeare's using these different forms of love. We have friendship, we have kinship and brotherhood. The responsibility to the family is a very, very important theme in Romeo and Juliet, and the idea of how your family loyalties are really, really significant and really important. Your loyalty to your friends and the brotherhood that you have with them is very, very significant. So looking at these different ideas of love and the different relationships within the play is going to be very, very important for us. Okay, the second of our key themes, contextual ideas and links that I'd like to consider is the idea of fate, chance and free will. The prologue mentions that the play is going to feature a pair of star-crossed lovers. Now what that means is a pair of lovers who have been chosen by fate and the idea of the stars holding your destiny. Now, for Shakespeare's audience, this would be particularly prominent because a lot of people would have believed in the idea of fate and chance and the idea of being able to tell your fortune from the stars. So contextually, when we're talking about these ideas of free will and decisions, what we might want to be considering is that many of Shakespeare's audience would feel that characters were bound to their fate. They would be, if they would be defying the chance that's been thrown to them, then that would go against the natural order of things. It could be argued that in Romeo and Juliet we see characters who try to change their own fates and end up in horrible consequences, and because they go against the fortune that was laid out for them in the stars. It could also be argued that free will plays an important role in the play. The characters seem bound by the constrictions of their role and their society around them. Both characters, Romeo and Juliet, are bound by their families, so they have to stay in their particular social circle. They're bound by their gender, the fact that Juliet has to obey her father and obey the men in her family around her, the fact that they are bound by their ages, the fact that they are young people who don't have the social status to be able to challenge what's going on around them. So this idea of free will and being able to make your own decisions and your own choices and the consequences of that is a really significant theme to consider, and a really interesting idea to consider as context when reading the play for the first time. Okay, the next theme that I'd like to consider is the idea of violence and aggression within the play. So Shakespeare's time, we've already discussed that we're talking about 1595, 1597, the end of the Tudor era and the end of the reign of Queen Elizabeth I. This was a time where violence was commonplace and life was cheap. So this is, for Shakespeare's audience, going to be one of the most prominent themes that they would expect to see in plays about society and about life. They would expect to see violence and they would expect to see aggression. The time that we're talking about, public executions were commonplace and they would be public. So Shakespeare's audience would be used to seeing violent extremes in their day-to-day lives. Crime, certainly in big cities, was rife. So you would have violent criminals roaming the streets. There were gangs of youths. It was common to carry weapons and for fights to break out. One of Shakespeare's contemporaries, who was Christopher Marlowe, was a fellow playwright, was killed in a pub brawl. He was stabbed just above the eye and killed in a bar fight. So this tells you the sort of society that Shakespeare's audience were living in. Therefore, they will expect to see violent actions, and this is continued throughout the play. The opening of the play starts with a street fight. It starts with a brawl, and therefore it's going to hook your audience in. There is consistent references to death throughout the play and consistent threats of death throughout the play. There are further violent actions and further violent threats and murders that occur. There are a few interesting things that we can pick up with the structure of the poem and the way that Hardy's constructed it and pieced this poem together. So what we have is the fact that it's a first-person narrative is significant, and the fact that it's a very personal perspective. It's Hardy's point of view, and it is a direct address to his partner. The fact that he talks about your eyes on me were as eyes that rove. This is a direct address. It's meant to be a personal reflection, talking to his partner. We could talk about how the poem seems cyclical. It starts and ends in the same place. If we imagine the couple walking around the lake or walking around the pond, they start and end in the same place. It's a circular pond, and it starts and ends in the same way. We stood by a pond that winter's day, and ends with a pond edged in great leaves. Cyclical narrative, and this could reflect Hardy's point of view that the relationship is going round and round his head and never actually leaves. We could talk about how the poem shifts its focus. It talks about the natural world and then zooms in to focus on his partner and her attitude, and then goes back to the natural world. So we've got this shift in focus throughout the poem and how it shifts beyond that. The fact that it has the perfect AB rhyme structure could indicate that Hardy's had long time to think about and reflect about this relationship, and that's reflected in the fact that he's had time to structure this perfect rhyme scheme. And although it's an imperfect thought in the sense that it's a very dark and miserable thought, it's a thought that he has had a long time to construct and to piece together. The time Shakespeare was writing, at the end of the Tudor era, was a time of great religious turbulence and religious strife. Queen Elizabeth, who was on the throne, was a Protestant. Her sister Mary, who'd been queen previously, was a Catholic, and their father Henry VIII was the whole reason between the split of the Catholic and the Anglican Church in England. He wanted a divorce so that he could remarry in the hope of having a son. So this is a time of great religious change and great religious conflict. Shakespeare chooses to set his play in Italy, which had remained a Catholic country, and does so to this day. He uses a lot of religious imagery within the play. Romeo quite often uses religious imagery when talking about Juliet, and he talks about it being like a holy shrine, and using the sort of religious iconography throughout is quite important. We also have religious characters such as Friar Lawrence, who is someone that Romeo goes to for guidance and for support, and might offer that sort of religious help at the time of need and a time of crisis. However, we also have some more natural-based religious significance, if you like. Romeo often talks about the stars and the moon and the sun as religious figures. He almost treats these like gods in their own right, and particularly when he's describing Juliet, he uses this sort of religious imagery to support his descriptions of her. So the use of the natural world as well as alongside religion, sort of divine ideas, creates an impression of a holy relationship between Romeo and Juliet, which might be significant when we consider it to be bound by fate or bound by chance, as I talked about earlier on in this video. There's lots of ideas that we could bring in here. It's worth having a read about the religious times of the Tudors and having a look at things like the people persecuted for their religious faith and their loyalty and their beliefs, and why loyalty might then become something significant as we read into the play a little bit deeper. Okay, what I'd like you to do for me today is have a rewatch this video, and if you need to, pause it after each section. I'd like you to make some brief notes on what we've talked about, all the different contextual influences that are going on around the time of Shakespeare. However, I'd also like you to consider the question which is going to follow, which is which of these contextual factors do you think is the most significant or the most important, and why? Have a think about which of these do you think will be the most influential on a writer and why that would be significant in what he chooses to write in the play. Tomorrow's lesson, we're going to have a look at the key characters so that we know who they are before we start to read the play properly and get our teeth into what's actually going on. Stay tuned, and we'll have today's film recommendation. Okay, today's film recommendation, I've gone for an epic war story, which is one of the most amazing opening sequences of any film that I've ever seen, and that is Saving Private Ryan. It's a film that doesn't shy away from the true horrors of war, and it's one of the really immersive sequences where you really get to imagine what life is like as as a soldier storming those beaches on D-Day. It's a fantastic film. If you've not seen it before, check it out. Like I said, the next video is going to be considering the characters of Romeo and Juliet, so stay tuned for that. Until then, take care.